This story happened when I was just a small kid, maybe 7 years old. But I remember that night as if it were now, right down to the smallest detail. My mother's voice, the numbers on the clock, the click of the door lock, and that eerie music from Home Alone, a melody I still can't hear without shivering. My parents started leaving me home alone early on. It was the 90s. Nobody even thought about hired babysitters back then, and life wasn't easy. Just getting out to visit friends for a party was a big event. That time was no different. They left for someone's birthday, leaving me home alone for the night. It was only the second or third time I'd ever been by myself. My parents repeated the usual rules multiple times. Don't watch TV for too long, turn off all the lights in the apartment before bed. I was only allowed to keep a nightlight on. Back then, I couldn't understand why, but later I figured it out. So TV, lights, and of course, the most important rule, which they had literally drilled into my little head. Under no circumstances should I open the door, even if there was a woman or a child behind it, even if they said a fire had started and I needed to escape immediately, even if someone I knew was on the other side. I already knew all of that well, but this time, Dad was especially serious and stern. Before leaving, he sat down in front of me, looked intently into my eyes, and said, "Boris, you're a big boy now, and you need to understand what responsibility is, right? Listen to me closely. If it is 12:12 at night and you are not asleep yet, then do not, under any circumstances, get out of bed. Do not turn on the light and do not open the door. I'm counting on you, son."
I nodded, not understanding why he was so serious. Dad was a bit eccentric anyway. He loved making up various rules for me that, at first glance, seemed a bit absurd. Some days I wasn't allowed to wear red, on others I couldn't take a bath. I was constantly getting confused by these prohibitions, and sometimes I even got in trouble with Dad for it. I'm still not sure if those rules were just strange fantasies, but the fact that the door had to be kept shut at 12:12, that I learned for the rest of my life. The parents left, and I waited a couple of minutes, listening to the silence. Then I bolted, running quickly through the apartment to turn on the lights in every room. Let it shine everywhere. That's safer. The light made the shadows in the corners less frightening. Being alone, I was always a little scared, though I didn't know what of. The fear was strange, not sharp, but sticky, like a cold film. It didn't jump out at me, didn't make me scream, but sat quietly somewhere deep inside, like a shadow in the corner. The TV was my salvation. I sat on the couch and turned it on. The screen flared, and I was immediately wrapped in a sense of delight. The first Home Alone was on. I knew it by heart. I could retell every joke, every one of Kevin's traps. I even quoted his lines to my friends. The movie was at the scene where Kevin jumps on the bed, happy to be home alone, just like me. Except for some reason, I felt no joy in the empty house without my parents. I watched the movie, but after about 10 minutes, I caught myself listening. It felt like someone was shuffling by the door in the hallway. Of course, no one was there, but the thought that my parents might not return suddenly hit me hard. What if something happened to them? What if they were robbed or got into an accident? They were so far away now, and I didn't even know exactly where. It got cold inside, and my palms suddenly started to sweat. Feeling uneasy, I jumped off the couch and rushed to the phone. It was huge, cream-colored with a long, coiled cord sitting on a shelf in the hallway. I had to stand on tiptoe to reach the buttons. My fingers trembled as I dialed 04455500099. One ring, a second, a third. "Hello? Yeah?" A slightly drawn-out male voice answered. I gathered my courage and blurted out loudly, just as I'd been taught. "Hello, this is Boris. Please put my dad, Victor, on the phone." The man burst out laughing and shouted off to the side, "Victor, it's for you!" In the background, music was blaring and people were laughing loudly. I heard someone yell, "Pour another one already!" And then Dad took the receiver. Dad? My voice was thin and trembling. Boris? What happened? Dad's voice sounded muffled, as if the roar of the music was dragging him away, taking him from me, carrying him off. Are you coming home? Of course we're coming, he laughed. You okay over there? I nodded, then remembered he couldn't see me and said, yes. That's my boy. We'll be there soon. Go to bed. Dad, do you remember what you said about 1212? For a second, the line went quiet, as if Dad had covered the receiver with his hand. Then he became more serious. Of course I remember. Will you do as I said? Yes, I replied. Good. Good night, son. He hung up. For some reason, I didn't feel any better. It felt as if my parents were somewhere very, very far away, as if there weren't just a few kilometers between us, but a whole different world.
I trudged back to the living room, sat on the couch, pulled my knees to my chest, and stared at the TV again. On the screen, Kevin was building traps, spilling toys, wetting the porch, laying out feathers by the fan. I knew what would happen next. Harry would run around with a burning head, Marv would slip on the ice and take an iron to the face, and then they'd be finished off by paint cans. I laughed. Suddenly, I heard something that made my heart beat faster. Somewhere far away, behind the door, in the stairwell, someone was slowly coming down the stairs. Step. Pause. Another step. I froze. The footsteps outside the door were slow, measured, and ominous. I tried to convince myself it was just a neighbor returning late from work. But then, why was he moving so strangely? And then came a sound that made my fingers tremble. A voice. Muffled, unintelligible, as if someone was standing too close to the door, whispering into the keyhole. I wanted to jump up, to hide, but I couldn't. I wasn't even breathing. Open up. My head spun. The TV kept showing the bandits getting caught, but I didn't see it anymore. Only the dark apartment around me and the locked door. My eyelids grew heavy. I blinked and suddenly woke up. The TV was showing the test pattern. I must have dozed off, and the movie had long since ended. I rubbed my face, brushing off the sticky sleep, and looked at the clock. 12:02. My heart hammered faster. Dad's words floated into my head. At 12:12, don't get out of bed. Don't turn on the lights. Don't open the door. I had 10 minutes left. I'll make it, I thought, and went to the bathroom. I yawned on the way, turned on the light, and started brushing my teeth. The mirror hazily reflected my pale face, and in the silence, only the scratching of the toothbrush against my teeth could be heard. Finishing up, I ran through the apartment again, turned off the lights in the living room, headed into the hallway, and then into my bedroom, trying not to look at the windows. The hallway door was closed, as it should be. Everything was fine. I crawled under the covers, pulling them up to my nose, and closed my eyes with relief. I opened them again. The knock was quiet, but distinct. I slowly turned my head to the clock. 12:12. A chill went through my chest. It was the same sound, just like in my dream. I wasn't breathing. The knock repeated, this time more insistently. Besides it, there was nothing to be heard. Usually at night, there are sounds in the stairwell, an elevator clanking, a neighbor's door creaking. But now, nothing. And then, open up, it's me. My mom's voice. I shuddered with relief. Although it was strange. Mom hadn't said she'd be home this early. Still, I slid out of bed and walked to the hallway on tiptoe. What if Mom felt sick and decided to come back early, and Dad stayed with friends? Or what if something happened to Dad? An accident? A tragedy? What if he never comes back? The
thought of something happening to Dad made me feel sick again. I ran to the hallway, but when I stood in front of the door, my feet felt rooted to the floor. Something was wrong. Behind the door, there wasn't a rustle, not even a breath, only a smell. Faint, but strange and sweet. It smelled like fish scraps left in a trash can until morning. Boris. Mom's voice again. A bit louder, a bit closer. My hands shook. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a stool, and dragged it to the door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it was echoing through the entire apartment. I climbed onto the stool and pressed my face against the cold peephole. Mom was standing there. I nearly threw the door open, but something stopped me. She looked strange. Her face was pale, her eyes black, motionless, as if painted on. Her arms hung limply, her fingers twitching slightly.
"Mom?" I whispered and swallowed hard. There was no answer. Mom didn't move, eyes cast toward the floor. She reminded me of a doll stuffed with straw and propped up on a stand. Suddenly, she tilted her head sharply, and I flinched. The movement was jerky, unnatural. And then, she started to walk. Or rather, she didn't walk. She glided toward the door, barely moving her legs, as if she were being pulled on strings. I went numb, my fingers gripping the edge of the door so hard my knuckles turned white. And then, Mom started running and hit the door with all her might. The crash was so loud that the stool beneath me wobbled, and I tumbled to the floor, hitting my elbow and crying out. I froze. Outside, another body slam hit the door, even harder this time. I screamed, and out of my mind with fear, I ran to the bedroom, dove under the covers, and pulled them over my head. I curled into a ball, not daring to breathe. The warmth quickly turned into stuffiness. The blanket stuck to my face, the air under it became heavy and humid, but I couldn't force myself to come out. Outside, someone hit the door again, not as hard as the first time, but enough to make the bed tremble beneath me. And then, the doorbell rang. Thin, unpleasant, piercing. It rang and rang, longer than usual, until it suddenly cut off, leaving behind a silence in which even my own breathing seemed too loud. I grabbed the corner of the blanket, squeezing it until my nails dug into my palms. Another knock. Then, someone dragged their fingernails across the door. I could have sworn I heard that sound, quiet and rough, as if they were scraping wood. I clenched my teeth, pressed my palms over my ears, and tried to convince myself I was just dreaming and was about to wake up, that my parents had already returned and everything was fine. But when I opened my eyes, I saw through the fabric of the blanket that the light in the room began to flicker. Once, twice, and then everything went quiet. Totally. The knocking stopped. The doorbell went silent. A stifling, heavy silence reigned. I lay motionless for a minute, 2, 3, and finally decided to climb out from under the blanket. I glanced at the clock. It showed 12:12. The hand hadn't moved a single millimeter. Before I could really process that, the phone rang. The sound was sharp, tearing through the silence, as if it weren't ringing from the living room, but right inside my head. I didn't want to get up. I shouldn't have gotten up. But the phone rang and rang and rang without stopping. What if it was my parents? The image of Mom's figure from the peephole, eerie, lifeless, stood before my eyes. What if that was her, and I hadn't let her in? I jumped up, ran to the phone and grabbed the receiver. My fingers trembled. I nearly dropped it at first, but managed to gather my courage and whispered quietly, "Hello."
"Hi, son," Dad said on the other end. I froze. There was no music in the background anymore. No voices, no laughter.
Just his voice. Quiet. Clear. Too clear. As if he weren't on the phone, but standing right here, behind my back. "Hi, son. How are you doing? Everything okay?" "Yes," I managed to choke out. "Good job." His voice was soft, gentle, almost lulling. "Do you remember what I told you?" I swallowed. "Yes." "Repeat it." I shifted in place, feeling the receiver becoming damp in my hand. "Don't watch TV for too long before bed. Turn off all the lights. At 12:12, don't get out of bed. Don't open the door for anyone." "Good," Dad smiled. I could hear that smile without even seeing him. "You're a good boy, Boris. I'm proud of you." I gripped the receiver tighter. "Are you afraid Mom and I are going to die?" I opened my mouth but couldn't answer right away. How did he know what I'd been thinking this whole time while they were gone? "Yes." "Then do as I say." I nodded and quickly said, "Okay. First of all, don't hang up." I clutched the phone with both hands. "Okay. Secondly, cover all the mirrors." I shuddered. "With what?" "Find something black." I nodded eagerly and jumped to my feet.
"Okay. And hurry, son." Dad's voice became slightly sterner. "We don't have much time." I threw the phone on the table and rushed to look for something black. Closets, drawers, rooms. I dumped things out, grabbing the first thing I found. A t-shirt, a sweater, a towel, it didn't matter. There was a large, old mirror in the hallway with a peeling frame. I pulled the sweater over it, and without even fastening it properly, I ran on. In the bathroom, my own pale, frightened gaze stared back at me. I slammed the door shut as if it could help, but a second later threw it back open, grabbed Dad's dark towel, and covered the mirror. There was one more left, in my parents' bedroom, Mom's mirror. I didn't want to go in there. It felt like that creepy figure of Mom with the black eyes was waiting for me. But Dad said I had to. I entered, trying not to look around. On the vanity sat a large mirror in an ornate frame. Dark, faceless in the dim light. I thought something stirred in its depths. I threw the t-shirt at the mirror and hurried back, trying not to breathe. Done, I exhaled into the receiver. "Good job, Boris." Dad's voice was warm, even proud. "You did everything right." I swallowed. The echo of fear was still beating inside, but the praise acted like a sip of hot tea on a cold day. Dad knows what to do. He will help me. "And now," he continued, "go to the door and turn the lock a few times, then push the door." I froze. "Why?" "Just do as I say, son. It's important." "Okay." My voice sounded hoarse. I slowly walked to the door. It seemed taller and more massive than before. Darker. I reached for the lock. My fingers were shaking and turned it once. At that moment, a sound drifted from behind the door. Not a knock, not a voice, a faint, barely audible rustle, as if someone behind the door had taken a deep breath. I froze.
My heart was slamming against my ribs so loudly, I thought it would burst out. I yanked my hand back and stepped away. "Dad?" I held the phone to my ear. Do you want me to open it? There's someone there." The line went silent. And then, Dad started screaming. His voice exploded, deafened me, and brought a freezing storm of terror down upon me. "If you don't open it, they will die!" Dad's voice no longer sounded gentle. There was steel in it, cold, ruthless, making my lips go numb. "Your parents will die!" Something on the line crackled, heavy breathing, as if someone else was breathing into the phone line. "Dad, what are you—" "They'll be sliced up, Boris." The voice became low, grating. "They'll start from their feet,
slowly, centimeter by centimeter. I'll hold them so they don't struggle. I'll listen to them choking on their own screams. I squeezed my eyes shut, my lips silently whispering, "No, no, no." "Then they'll be hung over a pit," the voice hissed like a snake. "Rats will crawl from below, hundreds of them. They'll climb into their mouths, their eyes, tearing the flesh of your mom and dad until there's nothing left." "Shut up!" I choked out. But Dad wouldn't stop.
They'll scream and call for you, but you won't hear them because the rats will get to their throats. Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Mom will scratch the walls until her nails come off her fingers. You can't even imagine how she'll scream, Boris, I yelled. She'll be choking on blood, and your old man won't help her with anything. He'll die too. Die, die. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. The cheap plastic cracked. But the voice didn't disappear. You will be left alone forever. Your parents will never come back. Never. I curled into a ball and covered my ears, yet I continued to hear all the horror the voice was speaking. It seemed to be seeping out of the walls, out of the darkness of the apartment. Need to turn on the light, I thought, and lunged for the switch, nearly tripping over the phone cord. I clicked it once, then again. Nothing. The darkness didn't budge. I dashed into the living room, to the next switch. Nothing. To the kitchen. Nothing. There was no light anywhere. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking. I pressed, I beat on the buttons, scratched the walls with my fingers, but the bulbs remained dead.
Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something in the living room window. At first, just a shadow. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. And then, a face appeared in the window. That face, I will never forget it. It was wrong, not human. The eyes were too deep, the mouth a long black slit. It didn't move, it just stared. We lived on the 4th floor, which meant the face was simply hanging in mid-air outside my window. I felt nauseous. I started backing away, but couldn't tear my gaze away. The face didn't disappear. On the contrary, it seemed to be getting closer. I bolted and rushed into my room, my fingers sliding along the walls, catching on furniture. The darkness grew thicker, and everything in it suddenly changed. I knew where the wardrobe was, where the coat rack and the bookshelf stood. But the moment I reached out my hand, I bumped into something completely different. The wall was soft and kind of sticky. Along the way, I tripped over a chair, and I'd swear it breathed like a living thing. Then my hand smashed into something smooth and round. It moved. I jerked my fingers away, not understanding what it was, and almost crawling, blind, I rushed through the hallway to my room door. Under my foot, something slippery stirred. I shrieked, pulled my leg back, pressed my back against the wall, and screamed because I thought someone had grabbed me from behind. Finally, I felt my way to my bed, collapsed onto it, pulled my legs up, and huddled in the corner. The room was shaking. From everywhere, there were knocks, rustles, creaks. Somewhere down below, in the walls, beneath the floorboards, sharp, dry sounds like nails scratching wood. I heard whispers, someone's voices, but they were too quiet to make out the words. Suddenly, in the living room, that familiar music from Home Alone played. Only now it sounded wrong, too slow, too muffled, as if a tape recorder had chewed up an old cassette. The low notes stretched out, turning into a hum. Outside the window, in the darkness, shadows stirred. Voices laughed at me. The rustles were creeping closer. I couldn't take it anymore and screamed again. I yelled with all my might until my chest hurt. All the sounds merged into a wild chaos, scraping, rustling, and laughter. I no longer knew what was real and what wasn't. And then, as if someone had thrown a blanket over the room, everything became a little quieter. I could still hear it, but as if from far away. The knocking didn't disappear, but it wasn't crawling under my skin anymore. I gasped for air. My head was spinning. It's all a dream. It has to be a dream.
I glanced at the clock. 12:12. Still 12:12. I stared at those numbers until I realized time. With trembling fingers, I grabbed the clock and turned the dial. The minute hand moved forward. Forward. 12:30. 12:45. 1 o'clock. The whispering subsided, the movie music died away, and I kept turning. 1:15. 3:02. Silence. Suddenly, the light came on, and the darkness retreated. The room was the same as always. Desk, bed, wardrobe, bookshelf, everything in its place. Only the air was heavy, as if after a storm. I listened. Not a sound. It felt like Mom and Dad should have been back a long time ago. I slowly swung my legs off the bed, wrapped myself in the blanket, and was woken by the sound of footsteps outside the door. I held my breath. I heard the key enter the lock. Turn. I squeezed the blanket in my fists with all my might.